In 2007, first-person shooters weren't clever. In 2007, first-person shooters focused less on art and more on bombastic set pieces or hyper-realistic simulations of war. But when Bioshock released in the same year, it was clever. It was very clever indeed. Bioshock was my first experience of games as art. Its underwater setting of Rapture was completely unique, but what really made Bioshock special was its narrative. A story with depth and a genre-defining moment that still makes the best of all time lists even now. But 2007 was a long time ago. Now there are more games with masterpiece narratives, and modern gaming is completely different. We live in the age of open worlds, always online, and live services. So where does that leave Bioshock? Well, I'll be answering that very question as I review Bioshock against modern games. I'll be looking at where it still holds up, and, unfortunately, where it could have done more. So, I think it's about time to start. If everybody's now on board the bathysphere, let's dive down to the city of Rapture and find out if Bioshock is still great today.
I rejected those answers. Instead, I chose something different. I chose the impossible. I chose Rapture.
Yeah, that still is the best opening to a first-person game I've seen, just ahead of this, and a strong contender with this. There's just something about it that pulls you in. The ambiguous setup, the plane crash, the mysterious lighthouse, the introduction to our main villain, and the jaw-dropping reveal of Rapture. Rapture is the star in Bioshock. It's the thing that stuck with me since 2007, and it's the thing that will always stay with me after 2021. It's a place that's familiar, but also alien. It's alien due to its 1950s theme with Art Deco architecture and post-war music. But really what I mean by that is that Rapture is alien because it's underwater. The fact we're underwater isn't actually a core part of the game. It's not like we leave Rapture and go scuba diving, or hop on a jet ski and try to outrun a huge tidal wave. No, water is only ever in the background. If we look outside, we see schools of fish swimming nearby, or the rocks of the seabed Rapture is resting on. Water is there to remind us where we are, at the bottom of the sea, isolated and alone. The game is split in two halves, separated by a moment which is considered one of the best in gaming history. I will talk about this moment later on, and just in case you haven't played Bioshock yet, I promise to give a spoiler warning before I do. The first half of the game sets up Rapture, how it works and how it's similar to a real city. We visit areas that you'd expect to see in a normal place. The medical pavilion with its dentists, funeral homes and cosmetic surgeries, as well as more recreational areas. The lush forests of Arcadia, Rapture's prime vacation spot, the farmer's market with its cheese stalls and wineries, and Fort Frolic, an entertainment district. In Bioshock's second half, areas are designed less to convince us that Rapture is real, and more to add depth to the world. It's the most poignant we get throughout the game, as we're shown where Rapture's citizens live in two contrasting areas. The first area is Olympus Heights, where the rich live at the Mercury Suites. We see apartments with huge rooms, expensive ornaments, that type of thing. But this isn't what makes Mercury Suites great. What's great about this area is that these apartments belong to the main characters in the game. Yep, we're literally walking around the apartment of someone we spent the last 8 hours getting to know. Moments later, we visit Apollo Square, and immediately we're shown that this is not a nice place. As we enter the apartments, we see poor living conditions, cramped spaces full of bunk beds, and people hanging dirty clothes inside the house. This moment is unique in Bioshock, as it's easy to see the similarities with our own world, the class divide, and the huge disparities of wealth. The rest of Rapture is pretty horrific, but this right here was the moment that stayed with me. The overall atmosphere is key to Rapture, as it makes sure we feel uneasy at every opportunity. We're always reminded that something in Rapture isn't right. Dead bodies are everywhere, often framed in ways to unsettle us, and the city is in complete disrepair. It's always dimly lit, usually with lights that flicker, or simply by the light of the ocean shining in through a window. Having this atmosphere is a start, and other horror games do this well. I played the Medium this year, which also has a great atmosphere. But the difference is, in the Medium, we're rarely in any danger. We see unsettling things around us, but we're left to wander through its haunting locations like we're walking around a twisted art exhibition. Now compare this to Bioshock, where scripted sequences are constantly thrown at us. One of these, for example, shows us the shadow of an enemy waiting around the next corner. The first time we're shown this is when a concerned mother is talking to her baby.
Why can't Mommy hold you to her breast and feel your teeth? Oh, no. No, 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 no.
When we walk around the corner, it turns out it's an enemy and she attacks us. Once the fight is over, we walk over to the pram and find out there was no baby. She was talking to a gun. What's great about these moments is that they're never the same. There's another time when we enter a morgue, see the shadow of the enemy, and then the lights cut out. We're in the dark and vulnerable. And another time, an enemy disappears before reappearing behind us, which literally made me jump out my seat. Because these sequences are always different, we never know what to expect, and therefore, we can never relax. There are a lot of reasons why this works, but one of the biggest reasons is because the enemies are genuinely terrifying. The enemies in Bioshock are splicers, regular people who have genetically modified themselves using Adam, a resource that has incredible benefits to the human body. But as with most things, of course, there's a catch. Adam also has negative psychological effects on its host, so the more Adam you use, the more you lose touch of reality. We see this as splicers, like the mother talking to her baby, which we now know is a gun, talk to themselves and say some troubling things.
My rose! I want it back! I want it back!
Where is he, Madonna? Where is the little sinner?
You think you know me?
One of the best parts about the enemies in Bioshock is that they're completely independent from us. In so many games, it's clear that enemies are waiting for us to enter an arena. They're either standing on a tile, waiting to be activated, or patrolling an arbitrary route for no reason whatsoever. Well, this never happens in Bioshock. Splicers wander into rooms simply to look around, search containers for loot, and even fight other enemies. I walked in on a group of splicers, fighting at least twice, which is a great way to make the world feel alive and organic. One of the best examples of this is in Mercury Suites, where two splicers are dancing to music. If you leave them alone, they'll continue to dance, but disturb the gramophone in any way, and they attack. I also think the splicers deserve special praise in terms of their design. There's the standard enemy types, the Leadhead Splicer, ranged, the Thuggish Splicer, melee, and the Nitro Splicer, explosives. But I was really impressed with the Houdini and Spider Splicers. Like the name implies, the Houdini Splicer disappears. They teleport around the map and throw fireballs at us from range. Fighting Houdini Splicers is always chaotic, as we're constantly spinning around, trying to predict where they'll appear next. The Spider Splicers, however, are completely different again. They crawl on the ceiling before dropping in front of us and attacking with two hooks melded to their hands. This is genius, because it forces us not only to fight in the horizontal, but also in the vertical, an area that we generally feel less comfortable fighting in. Great shooters understand this, the need for enemy variety in terms of appearance and moveset, but also in the space they fight in. Overall, combat is good. It's not quite on the same level as FPS games from 2007, but that's not really the point here. The point in Bioshock is to create strategic gameplay, rather than incredible action. An example of this is that combat isn't based on skill. Guns are weak and have high recoil, and we can't dodge incoming fire as enemies are insanely accurate. This means that combat revolves around a loop, taking down enemies as quickly as possible in order to use up the least amount of resources to make sure we're not left short if a tough encounter is up ahead. It's basically a puzzle, as we're trying to figure out the best way to defeat each enemy with the least amount of resources. Anti-personnel rounds for splicers and armor-piercing rounds for machines are a good start, as is the electro bolt and wrench combo, but better options are available. The spider splicers in particular can't be one-hit KO'd with the wrench, and backflip around, making them hard to hit. So another strategy is to use the electro bolt to stun them, and follow it up with a well-aimed shot with the crossbow. Nitro splicers can also be easily defeated with incendiary bolts, which ignites and then explodes their grenade box. Or we can use telekinesis to catch their grenades and throw it back at them. This is taken to the extreme for Bioshock's mini-bosses, the Big Daddy. The Big Daddies are tough. They have huge health bars that take an age to drain, and they kill us in a few hits. So the idea here is to not only defeat them using the least amount of resources, but to defeat them before they can damage us. The crossbow was the most effective, as it has trap bolts that can be strung across hallways, creating electric tripwires. And just for good measure, a few proximity mines can be placed on the floor. Then the challenge comes in luring the Big Daddy towards your trap, usually with a heat-seeking RPG if they're around a corner. You can see that this is different to boss fights in other games. We're not trying to learn the Big Daddy's moveset or trying to dodge incoming fire, instead we're placing down traps and setting up the battlefield like we're playing an RTS game. What's really clever here is that even though the Big Daddies are optional, there's a compelling reason to fight each one. The Big Daddies are guarding little sisters, children of Rapture who have been genetically modified to harvest Adam. This was one of the biggest talking points in 2007. The fact we're given a choice to save or harvest each little sister.
Thank you. Thank you.
It is a tough choice, as we obviously don't want to hurt them, but if we choose to save them, we only get half of the Adam we're supposed to. Well, it's supposed to be a tough choice, but in hindsight, it isn't as groundbreaking as I first thought. I'd say that the majority of people playing Bioshock saved the little sisters. I mean, if there's not much benefit in harvesting them, why would you want to hurt a child? There's a real missed opportunity here, as this system wasn't taken far enough. If the rewards for saving the little sisters were more stringent, say 80% less Adam and no rewards, it would have been a tough choice. We'd have to weigh up the benefits of doing the right thing against the drawbacks of less Adam. We wouldn't be able to upgrade our character, and as a result, the game would be harder. So, it is a good system, but it could have been much better. It's funny actually, because this choice used to be even less ambiguous during the early stages of the game. The little sisters used to be slugs, but nobody chose to save the slugs during playtests. Yeah, I'm glad that didn't make it into the final game. This is the biggest issue I have with Bioshock, the fact that it doesn't go far enough. It's probably a good time to mention that Bioshock is a spiritual successor to System Shock 2, a PC game from the 90s which was also developed by Irrational Games, and also had Ken Levine as creative director. In System Shock 2, you land on a spaceship to discover something isn't right. There's dead bodies everywhere, blood splattered on the walls, and the area is in disrepair. Wait, what? That sounds pretty similar to the start of Bioshock, doesn't it? Well, both games are similar on the surface level. They both have cutscenes only at the start and very end, and all of the story is told through audio logs. In both games, we're gradually piecing together the events that led up to the catastrophe we see today. But that's really where the similarities end, as System Shock 2 is a hardcore RPG, where the focus is on developing your character and manipulating the environment around you. The System Shock series is actually one of the games that created the immersive sim genre. And this is where Bioshock doesn't go far enough. I don't mean in its RPG systems, as I'm not sure that would have worked in this game, but I think it could have been a better immersive sim. In other games based on System Shock, like Prey 2016, we can interact with our environment in many interesting ways. We can use our goo gun to build temporary steps, allowing us to jump on a roof and enter through the skylight, or we can sneak through a vent to enter the room, or we can use a toy gun to fire a foam dart at the room's keypad, unlocking the door. In Bioshock, we do have some of these options. We can hack turrets and cameras, which is a staple of immersive sims, and some areas have different routes to access them. I was really impressed when these were available, like sneaking into the Fighting Madonnock's beer cellar and entering the pub from underground. And also when using plasmids to unlock new areas. Incineration to melt frozen ice, or telekinesis to grab key items are good examples of this. But mostly, these mechanics are shallow, often with one solution, rather than 4 or 5 like in Prey. I even tried unlocking a door using telekinesis to throw objects at a button, or even shooting the button to force the door open. Both didn't work. There was only one option: sneak in through the window, and that was it. It's a shame, because having more immersive sim mechanics would have made exploring more compelling. Exploration is already one of the best parts of the game, but it could have been the best part of the game. I've mentioned this in my other reviews, but games with great exploration understand we need rewards as we explore. Bioshock excels here, as we're constantly pushed into exploring because of the gameplay and because of the narrative. Broadly, mission objectives are extremely simple, usually where we're searching for an item to progress to the next area. Some of these are better than others, but a handful of times they turn into MMO-style quests. Fetch 7 distilled water bottles, kill 3 people and take their photo. I mean, one of these asks us to collect 4 wire clusters, which only drop from Big Daddies, so the objective might as well be kill 4 Big Daddies. This isn't as bad as it sounds though, as you soon forget about these generic objectives as soon as you start exploring. For one, it's the constant need to scavenge for ammo, health packs, EVE hypos, as well as auto-hack tools. Auto-hack tools were the most rewarding to find, as it means we can bypass the hacking minigame, which, after 2 playthroughs back to back, I never want to engage with again. On top of routine scavenging, we're also searching for items to make us stronger, tonics and weapon upgrades. Weapon upgrades are not unique for Bioshock, but what I really liked was the way we find them, as upgrade stations hidden throughout Rapture. One of these, for example, is locked in Sander Cohen's apartment. What's great about this is that we can only access it if we choose not to kill Cohen in Fort Frolic. If we let him live, he heads back to his house in Mercury Suites. Then, when we enter his house, he instructs us not to disturb the 2 splicers dancing together, which you'll remember from earlier in the review. But then, if we disturb the splicers, Cohen comes down from his room and attacks. Afterwards, his door is open and we get the upgrade. I thought that was really cool. There's one thing that takes exploration to the next level though, and it's one of my favourite parts of the entire game. It's the fact there are audio logs hidden everywhere that gradually add more detail to the world.
Without him, the people of Palo Square would give up. I asked him if he was going to lead the people in some kind of uprising against Ryan. He sighed and said, I am not a liberator. Liberators do not exist. These people will liberate themselves.
Sure, we get audio logs in other games, but it's rare to find this much quality and this much depth in any game. And if I had your undivided attention for the next couple of hours, I'd start talking about each character, their story, and the events that led to Rapture's downfall. But I don't think that's a good use of your time, as well as mine, so I'll just talk about the highlight, and hopefully you can see why this makes Bioshock special. Tenenbaum is a character we meet early on in the game, and we quickly learn she was the creator of the Little Sisters. The first audio tape we find is set many years ago and describes how she lived in a German prison camp at the age of 16. The doctor in the camp was running genetic experiments, and Tenenbaum, with no experience in medicine whatsoever, kept correcting his mistakes. The doctor saw Tenenbaum's talent for science and hired her to work alongside him, running the experiments. Fast forward 10 years, and Tenenbaum now lives in Rapture. One day she sees a fisherman working at the docks who has a deformed hand from fighting in the war. The fisherman is unloading a barge when a sea slug bites his hand. When he wakes up the next morning, his deformed hand is fully healed. Using the healing properties of the sea slug, Tenenbaum develops Adam, but what's sinister here is that she injects the slugs into the stomachs of children, creating the Little Sisters. This is why we find a slug when we harvest the Little Sisters in-game. Now this is where things get interesting, and if you ever need an example of how to write good characters, this is where you look. As Tenenbaum works with the Little Sisters, she starts to develop a maternal instinct. One day, a little sister sits on her lap and she looks down to see her creation. Adam oozes from the child's mouth, and she sees the dead glow in her eyes. Immediately, Tenenbaum hates herself for creating this monster. And finally, we see the end of Tenenbaum's arc as she works to save the Little Sisters. She asks us to help, which perfectly ties into the save or harvest system we see in the game. And this isn't just one solitary moment either. Every tape has this level of depth, ranging from a police chief who hangs up his badge when Ryan starts operating outside the law, to a parent with a missing child who realises she's been kidnapped and turned into a little sister. This level of quality is present across the entire game.
We barely recognize her. That's her, Sam said. You're crazy, I told him. That thing? This is our Masha? But she was right.
Okay, so now we've reached that moment, the moment where we discuss Bioshock's story. So, if you haven't played Bioshock yet, skip to the next section using the timestamps in the video. Okay, if you're still with me, let's look at why the story is still one of the most memorable in gaming history, but also why it's not as good as I remember.
So tell me, friend, which one of the bitches said to you, The KGB wolf with a CIA jackal.
Rapture was built by Andrew Ryan, a man who on the surface rejected society. We see this during the introduction of the game, where he suggests our freedom is taken away by governments, religion, and other political systems. So Ryan decides to get as far away from society as possible by building his utopia at the bottom of the sea. Here, no one can tell him how to act or what to do. He is free to live by his rules and his rules only. He's an interesting character because it's easy to understand where he's coming from. What he's saying makes sense. In some way, we do sacrifice our freedom in modern society, to work 9 to 5 in a job we may or may not like, for example. And if you're the right type of person, you might agree with him. You might even join him in Rapture. The inspiration for Ryan is from a book called The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand, from characters in the book as well as Rand herself. You can see that, right? Ayn Rand? Andrew Ryan? That's not a coincidence. The Fountainhead follows a fictional architect called Howard Rourke, who's expelled from college for refusing to follow its rules. Throughout the book, Rourke refuses to compromise on his beliefs. He refuses to design buildings in the way his clients or society wants. By the end of the book, Rourke has built a giant skyscraper in New York that he considers is a testament to mankind. Now, that is a brief summary of a very complex book, but you can see the similarities between Rourke and Ryan, how they both refuse to follow society's rules, and how they build a monument to themselves in the process. That doesn't really have anything to do with this review, but I thought it was interesting. Anyway, when we arrive in Rapture, we don't know any of this. All we know is that something has gone wrong and we need to escape. We're greeted by Atlas, a man who is fighting against the oppression of Ryan. Atlas tells us that his family is trapped and asks us to help them. That's all we know. Throughout the game, we're shown that Ryan is evil. We see evidence of his brutal reign, audio tapes that describe him lining up people to be shot, as well as propaganda throughout Rapture. A common ideology of Ryan is that men are the people who create, and parasites are those who ask where's my share. Initially it's thought-provoking, but it's only when we dig deeper that we see its evil undertones. I mean, we don't have to look far back in history to find examples of people being referred to as non-human, and how that allows people to do terrible things to each other. So we know that Ryan is evil, and as we all have families, we want to help Atlas, and we also have no idea who we are as a character.
Now, would you kindly find a crowbar or something? Bloody splicer, seal Johnny in before they... Goddamn splicers.
As this overarching plot is taking hold, we're also learning about the history of Rapture, and one of the bigger stories is the rivalry between Andrew Ryan and Frank Fontaine. Fontaine is a businessman who's gradually gained more and more power in Rapture. He owns Fontaine's Fishery, an early level in the game, as well as setting up Fontaine's Futuristics, the first genetics modification company in Rapture. As Fontaine became a more prominent figure, people started to follow him. Tapes from regular citizens say that Fontaine is a man of the people, whereas Ryan was out of touch, always hanging out with supermodels at Fort Frolic. Later on, a day came where everyone picked a side, and what followed was a civil war between Fontaine and Ryan and the start of Rapture's downfall. About halfway through the game, we finally confront Ryan, who by this point has figured out who we are. We enter his office and are greeted by these 3 words. Now, I had actually forgotten what the twist was here. After all, it has been 14 years since I first played Bioshock. But even though I knew there was a twist of some sorts, there was no way I would have guessed this. It turns out you're a sleeper agent, trained to follow any order, followed by the words, "Would you kindly?"
Would you kindly? Would you kindly get this? Would you kindly find that? Would you kindly find that? Would you kindly find? Would you kindly get this? Would you kindly head to Ryan's office and kill the son of a bitch?
You were created in a lab in Rapture, implanted with false memories, and sent to the surface before one day you'd return. The plane that crashed over Rapture was completely planned, and Atlas isn't who he says he is.
The name's Frank Fontaine.
Yes, Atlas is actually Frank Fontaine, who has finally one-upped Ryan to take control of Rapture. What makes this impossible to guess is that we're told Fontaine is dead. So there's actually another twist here, where Fontaine faked his death, underwent facial reconstruction, and took on the mantle of Atlas. Yeah, it's still as good as it was in 2007. I've heard a lot of people say that Bioshock falls flat in its second half, and I do understand why you might think that. After this point, the narrative loses all of its mystery, as all we're doing is hunting down Fontaine. However, I think the second half of the game is where Bioshock is at its best. And I think this is because we have all of the information to understand this world. We know why Atlas fought back against Ryan, as it was actually Fontaine manipulating disgruntled citizens to finally take over Rapture. For example, he built an orphanage for the Little Sisters in Apollo Square to create the illusion that he cares about people, especially these people who live well below the poverty line. And this was all happening as Ryan grew further out of touch, started assassinating people at random, and everyone's Adam use spiraled out of control. It was the perfect storm, and Fontaine cleverly took advantage of it. The second half is also the point where complex political themes are introduced. There's one moment in particular where Fontaine is discussing how he convinced people to help him, which has parallels with our own democracy.
You don't have to build a city to make people worship you. Just make the chumps believe they're worth a nickel.
This simply wouldn't happen in modern games, as developers are too scared to get political. When Watch Dogs Legion had some politics in it last year, it was praised for it, but in reality it said nothing profound. But Bioshock did say something in 2007, and it said it in a mature way that invites us to study it. The main issue I have with the narrative is the way it ends. We have an end boss fight against Fontaine, which feels like it should be in a different game. It's extremely goofy as we fight this glowing blue man who says things like this.
I'm gonna cut you into bits.
The actual ending isn't great either. There's 2 endings in total that change depending on whether you saved or harvested the Little Sisters. If we save the Little Sisters, we head back to the surface and take them with us. We watch them grow up, go to university, get married, and then they're next to us on our deathbed. But if we harvest the Little Sisters, we attack the surface world with an army of splicers and commandeer a nuclear missile, because apparently we're evil now. That makes no sense whatsoever. The problem is that both endings have nothing to do with the story. I wanted to know what happened to Rapture, as well as the characters we spent the last 10 hours getting to know. I've described quite a lot here, but this is only really scratching the surface. It really is. And this is why Bioshock is one of the most memorable stories in gaming. Sure, the twist takes us completely by surprise, but it's everything around that leaves a lasting impression. It's the vast history of Rapture, this underwater utopia that had promise, but ultimately fell after the discovery of Adam. It's the complex characters who are completely believable and change as the world changes around them. And it's the way we learn all of this, by gradually piecing together clues left throughout Rapture. It's not an original way of telling a story, but it's the way it's executed to the highest of standards that makes Bioshock special. So yes, Bioshock is still great.